My name is Maya Linden, and for the first 28 years of my life, I was a ghost story. I was the whisper in the other room, the empty chair at the holiday table, the forgotten name in a family portrait that centered, always, on my older brother. Today, I live in a small house I bought myself, nestled in a town called Cedar Falls, Washington. My front window looks out onto a sea of evergreen trees, and the air, especially after it rains, smells of pine needles and damp, rich earth. It is the quietest place I have ever known, and in its silence, I have finally learned to hear my own voice. It took 1 year. An entire cycle of seasons passing through the valley before the world I had left behind remembered I was missing. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning in October. I was sitting at my kitchen table, tracing the condensation ring my mug of tea had left on the polished wood, watching a low-hanging mist weave through the Douglas firs. The world outside was soft, muted, and peaceful. The ringing of my phone was a discordant tear in that tranquility. An unknown number. My first instinct, a habit born of a new and protective instinct, was to ignore it. But something, a flicker of old familiarity in the area code, made me swipe to answer. Maya. My father's voice. It was thinner than I remembered, stretched taut over a wire of irritation. There was no greeting, no preamble. Just my name, spoken as a summons. You need to come down to Seattle for the weekend, he said. This Saturday. I took a slow sip of my tea, the warmth a small anchor in the sudden, cold churn of memory. I said nothing, letting the silence stretch, forcing him to fill it. Did you hear me? He prodded, the impatience growing. It's important. Ethan's fiancée, Olivia, her parents are in town. We're having a dinner to formally introduce everyone. They want to meet the whole family. The whole family. The phrase was so absurd, so disconnected from the reality of my life, that a small, sad smile touched my lips. For them, family was a set piece, a backdrop to be arranged for important occasions. I was a prop they had suddenly realized was missing from the stage. I won't be able to make it, I said. My voice was even, betraying none of the old tremors that used to accompany any conversation with him. A sharp, indrawn breath on his end. What do you mean you can't make it? I told you, it's important. Olivia's family is very traditional. They value these things. It's for Ethan. It's for Ethan. Of course it was. Everything had always been for Ethan. My entire childhood was a landscape painted in his shadow. I wasn't angry. The anger had burned out long ago, leaving behind a fine, sterile ash of understanding. All that was left was a quiet, hollow ache. I understand it's important to you, I said, my words chosen with the care of someone navigating a field of old, buried mines. But I have other commitments. What could possibly be more important than your brother's engagement dinner? And then, something inside me, a gentle tide of truth that had been rising for years, finally spilled over. It wasn't a dam breaking in a furious flood, but a quiet, inexorable cresting of a riverbank. Dad, I began, my voice still soft. I don't live in Seattle anymore. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. It was a vacuum, a void of comprehension. I could almost picture him, standing in the kitchen of the house I grew up in, the phone pressed hard against his ear, his brow furrowed not in concern, but in sheer, frustrated confusion. What are you talking about? He finally managed. I moved away, I said simply. About a year ago. I didn't need to tell him where. The fact of my absence was the only thing that mattered. The fact that I could pack up the entire contents of my life, drive them hours away, and build a new existence without a single person in my immediate family even noticing my departure, was the whole story in a single sentence. It was a story they had written, and I had simply added the final chapter. That last day in my Seattle apartment felt like shedding a skin I had long outgrown. My friends, Sophia and Noah, were my steadfast, gentle accomplices in this quiet escape. The apartment, a third-floor walk-up in Capitol Hill, had been my sanctuary for 5 years, but it was also a place tethered to the past, just a few miles across the water from the family home I rarely visited. Now, its rooms echoed with the finality of my decision. Are you absolutely sure about this, Maya? Sophia asked, carefully wrapping a ceramic vase in newspaper. Her brow was furrowed with the kind of genuine concern that had always been absent from my own family. Cedar Falls is, well, it's quiet. Quiet is the point, I said, taping a box shut. I need a place where I can hear myself think. A place that's just mine. Noah, ever the pragmatist, was checking the settings on my new remote work hub. He worked in the same field, sustainable technology, and understood my excitement about the new job with Verdant Innovations. It was a company whose mission aligned with my own values, and they had not only offered me a significant raise, but the freedom to work from anywhere. The internet speed looks solid, he announced, giving me a reassuring smile. So, remind me again why your family gets the news via the grapevine and not from you directly. I sank onto a stack of cushions, the only soft place left to sit. The question didn't sting. From them, it was born of curiosity and love. I looked at their faces, open and kind, and felt a sudden need to unfurl the whole story, not as a list of grievances, but as an explanation. An origin story for the woman I was trying to become. Because for them, I've always been an afterthought, I said, picking at a loose thread on my jeans. It's not a dramatic statement. It's just a fact. My entire life was lived in the space Ethan didn't occupy. I told them about being 9 years old and winning a citywide art competition for a watercolor painting of the Puget Sound. I remembered the weight of the blue ribbon in my hand, the thrill that vibrated through my small body. That evening, I'd waited through dinner, my certificate tucked beside my plate, for someone to ask about it. "That's nice, dear," my mother said. When I finally presented it to her, I recalled. Then she turned to my father, and they spent the rest of the meal dissecting every play from Ethan's junior league soccer game. A game they had lost. It didn't matter. He was on the field. He was visible. The memories came not with sharp edges, but with the dull, persistent ache of an old bruise. The perfect report cards that earned a distracted nod, while Ethan's passing C in algebra was cause for a celebratory dinner out. The high school graduation where they took one photo with me before spending an hour talking with Ethan's football coach about his prospects for the next season. The real breaking point was college, I continued, my voice dropping. Ethan chose a private liberal arts college on the East Coast. The tuition was astronomical. They never hesitated. They took out loans, cashed in savings. They threw him a lavish going-away party. "And for you?" Sophia asked softly. "For me, they sat me down at the kitchen table for a financial reality talk. They told me, word for word, that Ethan's education was the family's priority and their investment. I would have to figure it out on my own." The memory was still stark, the polished oak of the table, my mother's hands folded neatly, my father's refusal to meet my eyes. It wasn't a moment of cruelty, not in their minds. It was a simple statement of resource allocation. Ethan was the prime asset. I was other. "So I did," I said, a flicker of pride warming me. "I got a full academic scholarship to the University of Washington for environmental science. I worked 2 jobs, one at a coffee shop on the avenue, another shelving books at the Sozalo Library. I lived in the dorms and then in a series of shared, drafty houses. I stopped going home for holidays because, eventually, they stopped asking. My friends were quiet, their silence a respectful witness to my past. The only one who ever seemed to see me clearly was my grandmother," I added, a genuine warmth spreading through my chest at the thought of her. "Grandma Anya. My father's mother. She's the one who sent me a dog-eared guide to scholarships. She sent me $50 checks tucked inside cards that smelled of lavender, with notes that said, 'For your books, my brilliant girl.' She was the only one who called me after I graduated to tell me she was proud." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. "This move, it's the next step. I sold my car, put a down payment on a small house in Cedar Falls. It's more of a cottage, really. It has a garden. I'm going to have a garden. The job with Verdant is a dream. It's all remote. I can finally build a life that feels like mine, from the ground up." Sophia came and wrapped her arms around me. "You deserve every bit of it, Maya." "I know," I whispered, and the words felt both strange and true. "I'm finally starting to believe that." After the call with my father, a storm of digital noise tried to invade my hard-won peace. First came the text from my mother, Isabella. Maya, your father told me what you said. I don't understand why you're being so difficult. Family is the most important thing. Then, a message from Ethan. Maya, what's going on? Dad's furious. Just come to the dinner. It's one night. Don't make this a whole thing. I read the messages, and instead of the old, familiar panic, I felt a profound sense of distance. It was like watching actors in a play perform a scene I'd seen 100 times before. Their motivations were so transparent. Maintain the status quo, smooth over the cracks, present the flawless facade. My actual feelings were irrelevant to the production. I put my phone on silent, pulled on my rain boots, and stepped out the back door, straight into the forest that bordered my property. The air was cool and clean. Raindrops clung like jewels to the ferns that carpeted the ground. I followed a narrow path worn by deer, my feet sinking slightly into the soft, damp earth. With every step, the tension in my shoulders eased. Here, there were no expectations. The ancient trees didn't need me to be anything other than what I was. This was my sanctuary. This was real. Their frantic, buzzing world felt a million miles away. When I returned an hour later, my cheeks flushed from the cold and my mind clear, there was a missed call from a number I knew by heart. Grandma Anya. I smiled and called her back immediately. Hello, my dear. Her voice was a warm, familiar melody. How are my Cedar Falls? They're misty and beautiful today, Grandma, I said, sinking into the armchair by the window. I took a walk in the woods. That sounds lovely. It does my heart good to picture you there. There was a slight pause. Listen, I imagine you know why I'm calling. Your mother got in touch with me. I sighed. Let me guess. She wants you to talk some sense into me. That was the general idea, she said with a dry chuckle. But you and I both know that's not my role. I told her that you are a grown woman who is more than capable of making her own decisions. Especially since you've been making them on your own for a very long time now. Tears pricked my eyes, tears of gratitude. Thank you, Grandma. Oh, hush. There's no need for thanks. I just want you to be happy. They're in a panic because this is the first time your absence has had a direct consequence on Ethan. They don't know how to handle it. She paused, then added, her voice softening with a wisdom that felt as old as the trees outside my window. You've spent years building a life that nourishes you, Maya. Don't let them trample your garden to patch a hole in their own fence. Her metaphor settled in my heart, a perfect, shining truth. My life was a garden I had painstakingly cultivated in secret, tilling the soil, pulling the weeds of self-doubt, watering the seeds of my own worth. And it was finally beginning to bloom. I spent the rest of the week tending to it. I worked on a challenging project for Verdant, losing myself in the elegant logic of sustainable design. I spent an evening organizing my bookshelf, the scent of old paper and ink a comforting perfume. I drove into the small town of Cedar Falls, bought fresh vegetables at the local market, and had a long conversation with the owner about the best time to plant garlic. I was weaving myself into the fabric of a new life, a life of my own design. The following Saturday came and went. I imagined the scene in Seattle, the polished dining table, the carefully chosen wine, my parents wearing their strained, formal smiles. I imagined the empty space where I was supposed to be, a ghost at their feast. I felt no satisfaction in their discomfort, only a quiet, resolute peace in my own home. I made a simple dinner of roasted vegetables and salmon, ate it while reading a book, and went to bed early, the sound of rain on the roof my lullaby. On Sunday, my father called again. His tone had shifted from anger to a kind of wheedling desperation that was somehow more unsettling. We had to tell them you were sick with the flu, he said, the lie tasting sour even through the phone. They were disappointed. They seemed to think a close family is very important. I see, I said, offering him nothing. The wedding is in 2 months, Maya. You have to be there. We can't make up another excuse. His voice rose again, the desperation curdling back into a demand. You have to be there. No, I said, the single word as solid and unmoving as the mountains outside my window. I don't. Then came the line I suppose I had been waiting for my entire life, the final, rusty weapon in his arsenal. His voice dropped to a low, threatening register. If you turn your back on your family like this, if you refuse to support your brother, then don't expect to be in my will. I will cut you out completely. A year ago, that threat might have landed with some weight, a final, symbolic rejection. But now, it was a feather floating in the wind. I didn't laugh. There was nothing funny about the brokenness of it all. I just felt a wave of pity. Pity for this man who thought the only value he had left to offer his daughter was a monetary one. A quiet sigh escaped me. "Dad," I said, and my voice was impossibly gentle. "That doesn't matter to me." "What do you mean it doesn't matter?" he sputtered. "It just doesn't," I said. "I've worked very hard to build a good, secure life for myself. I have a career I love. I bought a house this year." The silence that followed was different from the one before. This one was heavy with shock, with recalibration. I could hear the gears turning in his mind, the old ledger of my worth being hastily, clumsily updated. "A house," he finally whispered. "You bought a house?" "Yes." "Well," he said, his voice suddenly thick with a false, hearty pride that made my stomach clench. "Well, that's wonderful, Maya. Just wonderful. Your mother and we are so incredibly proud of you. We always knew you had it in you." The insincerity was a physical thing, a slick coating on his words. It was the final, sad confirmation that their love and pride were not for me, the daughter they had never known, but for my success, a shiny object they could now claim as a reflection on them. "I have to go, Dad," I said softly, cutting through his performance. "Goodbye." I ended the call and stood looking out the window, not at the mountains, but at my own faint reflection in the glass. The woman looking back at me seemed calmer, sadder, but infinitely stronger than the girl who used to flinch at that tone of voice. I had not won a battle. I had simply chosen to walk off the battlefield. The wedding happened in the crisp, bright heart of December, without me. I spent that weekend volunteering at a local animal shelter, my heart soothed by the uncomplicated affection of a dozen rescued dogs and cats. It was nearly Christmas when Grandma Anya called with what she termed a family bulletin. It was a beautiful ceremony, she began, her tone diplomatic. "Olivia looked lovely. But the atmosphere, my dear, you could have cut the tension with a butter knife." I settled into my armchair with a cup of tea, ready to listen. "Olivia's parents are sharp people," Grandma Anya continued. "Intelligent, perceptive. They spent the whole rehearsal dinner asking pleasant but pointed questions about you. Why weren't you there? What do you do? Where do you live?" Your parents fumbled through their old "she's ill" story, but it was clear no one was buying it. It seems they did a little of their own research. Research? They're lawyers, Maya. They found an article about you online, something your company published about a project you led. They were impressed. And it made them wonder even more why this successful, accomplished daughter was so conspicuously absent. They put two and two together and realized you weren't exactly the cherished baby sister of the family. I felt a strange, detached sense of vindication. What happened? They had a very frank conversation with Ethan. They asked him why he never spoke of his sister, why she wasn't a part of his life. They wanted to know what kind of man their daughter was marrying, a man who would allow his only sibling to be so thoroughly erased. A silence settled between us. I thought of Ethan, my charming, easygoing brother, who had always floated through life on a current of parental approval. He had never been forced to confront the architecture of our family, because he was the one living in the penthouse. "I don't think he had any answers for them," Grandma Anya said softly. "The rift between the families is one thing. But I think it created a rift between him and Olivia, too." She looked uncertain. All day. A few days later, a text message appeared on my phone from a new, unknown number. "Maya. It's Ethan." I stared at the name on the screen. I think I messed up. Not just with this. With everything. "Olivia is asking questions I don't know how to answer. About you." The message was different from his first one. The demanding, entitled tone was gone, replaced by something that sounded lost and confused. He wasn't telling me to fix it. He was admitting, perhaps for the first time in his life, that something was broken. I read the message 3 times. My finger hovered over the delete button, the familiar motion of erasing their world from mine. But I didn't press it. I didn't reply either. I simply turned the phone over, placed it face down on the table, and left the message sitting there, a question mark suspended in the quiet of my house. Another year turned. The woods outside my window cycled through the vibrant green of spring, the deep shadows of summer, and into the fiery blush of a second autumn. My garden, once a patch of bare earth, was now a thriving testament to patience and care. I had rows of kale and chard, sprawling zucchini vines, and a corner dedicated to the fragrant herbs Grandma Anya had taught me about as a child. I had adopted a dog from the shelter, a scruffy, gentle soul named Barley, whose companionship filled the house with a quiet, joyful energy. My life had taken on a rhythm that was entirely my own. Work was fulfilling, my small circle of friends in Cedar Falls was warm and real, and my home was a sanctuary. The drama of the Lindens of Seattle felt like a story I had read about someone else, long ago. One afternoon, sorting through the mail, I found a letter. A thick, cream-colored envelope, with my name and address written in my mother's elegant, looping script. They had found me. I held it in my hand, the paper cool against my skin. For a moment, the old world threatened to rush back in. I could feel the weight of their expectations, the pull of their unresolved history. Barley nudged my hand with his wet nose, and the spell was broken. I walked into my small home office and opened a wooden box on my bookshelf. It was where I kept important documents, my grandmother's old letters, my university diploma, the deed to my house. I placed my mother's unopened letter inside, next to the others. I did not throw it away, but I did not open it. The act felt significant. It was an acknowledgement of the past, of the bond of biology that could never be fully severed. But it was also a choice. A choice to contain it, to give it a place, but not to let it dictate my present. The power to open that letter, to engage with its contents, was mine and mine alone. And I was not ready. Maybe I never would be. Later that evening, I sat on my back porch, wrapped in a thick wool blanket, Barley's warm weight resting on my feet. The sun was setting, casting a golden, ethereal light over the valley. I thought about Ethan's text message, still unanswered on my phone, and the letter from my mother, unread in its box. A profound sense of peace settled over me, as soft and encompassing as the evening mist. It was a peace born not of resolution with them, but of resolution within myself. I felt a pang of distant sorrow for the family I had, for the connections that had withered from lack of light. But it was overwhelmed by a deep, quiet, and boundless gratitude for the life I had built in its place. The healing, I realized, was not about forgiveness or reconciliation. It was not about them finally understanding. It was about me, finally understanding that my worth was not something they could grant or withhold. It was the bedrock on which I had built my home. And here, in the gentle quiet of my own life, I was free.